And you've just heard No Uncertain Terms, the opening track on Advanced Retreat, the new album from the Cathode Ray. And I'm joined now by Jeremy Thoms from the band. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, Ali. Good to speak to you.
Great to speak to you too. First of all, what can you tell us about Advanced Retreat?
Well, it's had quite a long gestation. I think we're kind of in sort of 2024 is an interesting year for albums. I think a lot of them date back to kind of like lockdown and all that. I mean, basically, I'd come off the sort of the promotional thing for the previous album was kind of cut short in its prime. We'd only just released it in November and we'd done a few gigs, and then suddenly lockdown happened. And I thought, oh, well, hey, I'm just going to sit. So I sat in my kitchen with my acoustic guitar and a cassette recorder, old school, and essentially wrote an album in the main initial lockdown. So sort of kind of March, April, May through to the summer. I kind of chipped, and so I basically had about sort of a little bit more than I needed, maybe 11 or 12 tunes. And then, yeah, so it kind of, it was interesting. I had the title. I always have titles to begin with. And the Advanced Retreat, I was amazed that nobody had ever called an album that, because I like the phrase. So I had that as a sort of kind of model for the lyrics, you know. So there's a lot of sort of, I wouldn't say contradictions, but sort of, you know, hope and despair. And I think I put in the press release all these different things. I realized that it was subconscious, really. But there's a lot of sort of sense of, I think, because we were all in lockdown and it was all very uncertain, that came out in the lyrics. So it's a sort of, yeah, it's a lockdown record, but then the demos were made, you know, afterwards. And then once we all got back to normal, we recorded it the way we usually do, sort of all over the country, down in Yorkshire, up here, hither and thither. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think that kind of sums up how a lot of lockdown felt, was that there was little moments of hope and then there was other moments of despair, and like sometimes they would happen in the same day or, you know, between news bulletins or whatever it might be. And it's interesting. I think you're right. There's not just a lot of albums and music being released now that had obviously been considered and made or written during lockdown, but it's happening with novels as well. I've read a couple recently where they were kind of, the gestation period, if you like, was during lockdown, and people, you know, longing to get out and about and have human contact and all those things that we kind of took for granted that had disappeared. And in terms of the recording, that's interesting. So, you know, how do the Cathode Ray normally record? Is it one where you kind of are here, there, and everywhere as you described?
Yeah, well, I mean, our process is, I mean, each album has been done in a similar kind of way. Is I do sort of fairly detailed demos, you know, of the tunes, the way I see it. But when I say detailed, the sort of the essential arrangements are there, but I deliberately leave gaps for the other guys to do their thing. So, you know, main riffs, main things, main stuff like that. That's all sent off to everyone. And then usually what we do is we either I go down, our drummer and guitar, Dave Mack, and guitarist Phil Biggs, they both live in North Yorkshire. And luckily, Dave Mack has, he's an architect, and he has, and essentially we sort of rehearse and record in his house. So we go down there, we rehearse stuff. It's usually just maybe a sort of skeleton version of the band. I'll maybe play bass and Phil play guitar, and we rehearse it. And he's got all the facilities to record all the drums. So that's sort of the foundations of it is done down there. The drums, a few little bits and bobs, and that gets re-imported up here. And then, yeah, we all kind of add, a lot of it was done, some of it was done, well, not a lot of it, but some of it was done by email, you know, flying bits in. Steve Fraser, the guitar player, he would come over, do sessions. Neil Baldwin come in from deepest, darkest Broxburn to do his bass parts. And yeah, kind of we slowly built it up in sort of in layers, yeah.
So that's a good time to ask, who are the Cathode Ray? Maybe in terms of members and the band more generally.
Yeah. Well, there's myself, kind of, I guess the head honcho, sort of self-appointed, and everyone's kind of happy. It's a benign dictatorship. I think that's the phrase they call it. Yeah, I do a bit of everything. I can kind of sort of fill in gaps, but I'm kind of sort of, I always call myself jack of all trades, master of none, and that's why I've got the other guys in. So I kind of play lots of instruments and sing. Then I've got Neil Baldwin, he famously previously of TV21 and the Bluebells and various things. So I've known him since 1981. So we go back a very long way, and we were in a band in the 90s called New Leaf. So Neil and I have done a lot of work together, so it's almost telepathic the way we work together. It's great. Steve Fraser on guitar. Again, sort of lots of sort of past history in Edinburgh. He currently also plays with Camille O'Sullivan, the Irish chanteurs. He's great to work with. He's also a maverick player. He always adds something that I would never think of, which is brilliant. Yeah, Phil Biggs, another of the Yorkshire guys. I would say he's the new guy, but a bit like Ronnie Wood. He's been there like 10 years, and he's still the new guy.
Still considered the new guy.
Yeah, and Phil Biggs, and then drummer, as I said, David Mack, drummer extraordinaire. His sort of history. I first met him sort of probably way back in the 80s, and he was actually originally in the Twin Sets with Gay and Rachel and all that, and Bop Shabam, various sort of Edinburgh bands. But I've worked with him now for over 20 years, 25 years. So we're it's a good lineup, and we really know it. We're really good friends. Quite apart from the musical thing, and we just work really well together. It's a pleasure.
So you've known many of them for a long time, as you suggest, but the band came together in the mid-2000s, is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've probably heard it's a little, the backstory's a little bit sort of complicated, but basically my pal Paul Hae, he of Joseph K, we sort of hung out together, and we were doing just lots of sort of drinking and partying and everything, and we ended up writing some tunes, and it sort of grew legs, and we had an album, and then we thought, well, we need to get a rhythm section to record these tunes, and so David Mack, Neil Baldwin were summoned, and we made that first album in sort of kind of 2005, 2006. We did the first single, and then Paul quite simply got cold feet. He did not want to do the whole band thing, the gigging thing, and we just sort of thought, well, we've done all this work, so we'll carry it on. So in a way, it's quite good now, because we're actually defined in our own right. But to begin with, it was a bit annoying. It was always Paul Haig's side project, this and that. I mean, it was probably always more driven by myself. It was a friendship, really. It was just two mates writing tunes, and I wanted to take it further. It was perfectly amicable. Paul said, right, I'm off, and that's when we brought Steve Fraser in. And it was so the first album was a bit of a sort of slow thing, because we had to feel our way, not tread on any toes, and so the first album took a while to actually get released, with Steve replacing parts of Paul, taking his vocals off it. So, it was a situation where Paul was happy with what we were releasing. So, the beginning of it goes back almost 20 years, amazingly. Yeah.
And so it went ahead with Paul's blessing, and then, you've developed on from there.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, sometimes it does get, and I think it kind of annoys Paul as well. Sometimes people still kind of refer to him in it. And I have to say, no, if there's nothing to do, it's not, he co-wrote, 7 or 8 tunes on the first album, and did some, and that's basically it. And he's like, and he actually gets credited as a guest musician on the first record. But beyond that, so, and since then, it's just grown legs, and it is what it is. Yeah, now, yeah.
Did the first album come out on Stereogram recordings, or did that happen later? Did the Stereogram happen later?
Well, the Stereogram thing came about. It was a sort of, I set it up really just because I was getting frustrated. We had various things. We were on a label called Pronoia, who released the first single. And then we hooked up with my friend Innes Riki. He had a label called Reaction, and we did the second single with him. But there was always delays, and schedules and this and that. And I just thought, sod this, I'm just going to start my own label. It can't be that difficult, especially now. I mean, it's even easier now. But even then, those things like CD Baby, Amazon and so on. So I started the label initially just to do the first Cathode Ray album and get it out there. But the minute I had started it, word spread, Jeremy's got a label. And I mean, the first out of it was James King and the Lone Wolves. Innes just said, James King's got an album, an unreleased album. I couldn't believe it, because I thought, surely, legendary band, why would they come to me? Why didn't they go to even like Douglas McIntyre's Creeping Bent, or I don't know. Anyway, apparently they just wanted a clean slate. They wanted sort of something, and they liked the idea of working. The old friend of Innes's anyway. So yeah, and then it grew, but it was nice because it made it a proper label. And then everyone who, if you followed it, quite a few artists, I think there's about 14 to date, either still there or have been through the doors, sort of thing. Can
you name a few of them that you've worked with? Because as you say, it is getting on to be quite a lengthy list now.
Yeah, well, poet, sort of, etc. Roy Muller.
Oh yes, I used to work with Roy. Yeah.
Right. Well, Roy of Dunbar. Yeah, he was the next one to. In fact, maybe he was the first after the initial thing. I met him. I think we were actually at a Vic Goddard gig, and he said he was having problems getting. He was trying to release an album, and his label weren't doing it. And I said, "Oh, I've got it all in place. Let's do it." So there was Roy, and then there was a bit of a I wouldn't say like a flood, but a whole the floodgates opened, and then after a couple of years, we got Band of Holy Joy. They did an album with us. St. Christopher Medal.
Oh yes.
They've done 2 albums. They're working on a 3rd just now. They're still on the books. The Eastern Swell, who did 2 kind of sort of folk rock I didn't know them before. They approached me, loved what they did, and that actually leads to now, because the main songwriter from the Eastern Swell, Chris Reeve, that's going to be the next release on Stereogram through Last Night from Glasgow. Right. So he's still very much on the books. And of course, and then we did a new Leaf record that was an old one that was kind of sticking around. And of course, your friend Louise McCorkindale.
Yes, absolutely. And
Only a Ghost. Yeah.
I just as you're naming them, I'm just thinking, I've got that. I'm kind of ticking the. Yeah. So it's a fine collection, and actually something about right from the beginning, Stereogram had a strong image, the font you used, the covers you used. Was that something that you were determined to do from the start, to have that kind of strong branding, if you like?
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, it was one of these things I couldn't believe that the name hadn't been done, because I'm a huge pop, I've been a fan of pop music since I was like 5 years old. So I've always loved the whole, the imagery, names, everything, logos, very important, Parlophone, whether it's Parlophone or Factory Records, identities of labels. So yeah, the name Stereogram, brilliant. I've got this great name. And then I wanted to, simple, but very sort of stylish, I chose the font and put that all together. So, and I think it's almost by accident, because I've got a sort of artistic background. My father was a painter. I studied design. So I've got a kind of design sensibility as well. So the visual presentation of everything is very important. So yeah, it's just trying to get to, I know it sounds a bit to have a cool label, but just have something that was a nice identity, not too much on it.
Yeah.
Manageable, keep it small. But most of, first and foremost, I had to be a fan. I'm a fan of every group that I've worked with. If I think something would sell, but I don't like it, I can't do it. I've got to be, when people approach me or get sent stuff. Stur, that's another name I forgot. I must have mentioned Stur. Yes. They're great. My friend Scott McKinley, who would never forgive me if I'd forgotten him. So yeah, just so, it's also fun. That word. It's everything takes things so seriously and stuff, but it's quite fun to do. I like to keep it, and a sort of a social thing as well with all the acts. So yeah,
it's a common thread, I think, amongst the indie labels in Scotland, at least the people I know. They absolutely are only releasing the things that they love, and it can be hard work, and almost the biggest perk of the job is releasing people whose music you really fight for, you really believe in.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think that a lot of them started when I started Scots Whay Hae. I was inspired by a lot of people who were writing music blogs or that kind of thing online, and then many of them went on to foreign labels because the music they were writing about wasn't getting released anywhere, you know? So that must be something to be able to say, yeah, I believe in this band and I am able to put their music out. It must be a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, say the most recent example, Louise. I mean, I knew her was an old friend of her sister, Morag, way back in the Aberdeen days, and it was Morag actually said to me, "My sister writes songs," and you know, it could be one of those situations where you know it could have been quite awkward, you know. Oh, and I said, "Oh, well, no, tell her to send me the stuff," but I was absolutely blown away. I mean, it really was. It was like she sent me this stuff, and you know, you've spoken to Louise, and she's very self-deprecating and very modest. And but I just thought, what an incredible talent, what incredible songwriting talent and voice and everything. And I was really and you know, she's very realistic as well. You know, she's not expected to be a pop star. She doesn't want to do any gigs. She doesn't mind if 5 people hear it or 500 people hear it, as long as those people get it.
Yeah,
like you got it, and there's a handful of folk. Our friend Ann Tyler, she's a big fan. If the people that appreciate, this applies to the whole label actually. If the people that get it are folk that I respect, I'm happy. You know, I just want people who understand what we're doing and get it, and so Louise was absolutely a case of that, because you know, on the surface of it, it's not a very marketable. She's not, you know, she's a woman of a certain age, basically, you know, but huge, massive talent, and we are working. There's been a little break over the summer while I was kind of getting all this and the James King album together, but there's going to be more stuff coming from her soon, and hopefully an album at some point.
I think what you've done, which the best labels do, is Stereogram for people like myself becomes a label of quality. You know, you think, well, Stereogram's got something new coming out, I'm going to check it out because I know what they've done in the past.
Yeah, that's very much what I want to get. I want people to sort of trust the label, and actually when we hooked up with Last Night from Glasgow, you know, I think hopefully maybe Ian knew a bit about our background and stuff, but he again sort of trusted me in terms of, you know, the brand, because I actually said to him, do you want to, when we had our first meetings, I said, do you need to hear it? You know, I took through a CD of some stuff. Said, no, Jeremy, I listen to the records when we get test pressings. So again, that's like faith in what I'm doing. And so far we've delivered the James King album, our album, the next one, the Chris Reeves solo album, which I produced and play bass on. Again, I know it's a great record. He's a great songwriter. So I would never put anything out under the Stereogram name that I wasn't proud of and, you know, thought should be heard.
And how did the relationship with Last Night from Glasgow come around? And what is it exactly? Is it a collaboration, or how does it work?
Well, it came about, I think it was always sort of in the back of my mind, because I noticed that they were teaming up with labels, because I noticed that Creeping Bent were working with them and so on. But it kind of grew legs when my friend, our mutual friend Ann Tyler, I think she was going to do her album. She'd sort of signed. Nobody really gets signed, but anyway, they agreed to do her album, and she had another record that she was going to do with us,
right? Which
is still unreleased, but another collaboration. She's got another project that she was going to do with Stereogram. And then she said, well, why don't you approach Last Night from Glasgow and see if you'd like to do it as a co thing? And that sort of opened the doors. And I think what Ian's phrase was, collaboration is better than competition. And which I thought was a nice sort of phrase. And he said, well, and although we haven't actually done that particular record with Sam, and whether it might just end up, that one might just come out Last Night from Glasgow purely. But to answer your question, it's a manufacturing and distribution deal. They kind of sort of take care of all the sort of the getting into, I don't like to say the boring stuff, but the really important stuff to get that music out there. And they do a beautiful job. I mean, working with Seabass, which is this lovely attention to detail. The records sound great. I mean, I've got quite a few Last Night for Glasgow albums now, and they all sound. I mean, the attention to detail is superb, and yes, so it just means that I don't need to worry about. Basically, I give them the art, I give them the music, so I'm in charge of all that creative side, and they will get it pressed, they will get it distributed, and then we kind of work together on things like press and radio. It's all hands to the pump, you know. So so if they get something, that's great. They've got a plugger. If I get something, that's great, because we're all going in the same direction. It's a great relationship, and yeah, no, I've really enjoyed working with Ian Smith. Good.
And you mentioned early on that the last album, due to lockdown, the kind of promotion of it and playing live came to a very abrupt halt. Are there plans to play Advanced Retreat live and do gigs?
Yeah, definitely. The various reasons, there was some sort of interband, just sort of personal problems and so on, but which I won't go into detail. But we've got a gig. The next gig we've actually got booked is the end of November, playing with James King and the Lone Wolves again at the Voodoo Rooms. And certainly around that time, I haven't actually organised it, but we're probably going to try and do. So the promotion of this is going to be a little bit delayed, probably sort of late autumn. But actually, it sort of happened out of necessity. But I quite like the idea now, because I think that when bands launch records, nobody knows the record.
Yeah.
And actually, and bigger groups, actually, they put their album out, they might do a small thing, but then they go on tour a few months later, once folk have got to know it. And this record's been really well received, and it's been selling quite well. I mean, we have a small audience, but within that small audience, it's pretty good, and most folk have bought it. So I quite like the idea, maybe by November, and then going into next year, give them a bit of time, folk will know these songs. So, you know, so, and it gives it legs, and you know, we can kind of work on it over the next year, playing live and so on.
Yeah, it's true, and people have their favourites, and yeah, there's more kind of interaction with what you're playing. I remember going to see Hamish Hawk before the Heavy Elevator came out, and then seeing them again maybe a few months later, and everybody knew the words. You know, there was that kind of interaction with the album and falling in love with it as well.
Yeah.
Well, let us know if there's any future live dates as well, Jeremy, and I'll be sure to let. I
will. We're going to be sort of working a few things out, definitely. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been a real pleasure.
No, great chat to you too, Ali.
And this is the Cathode Ray and Halcyon Days.